We're on, Glenn. We are on the Speak Your Truth with Mark Ross podcast. I'm your host, Mark Ross, and I have with me today, ladies and gentlemen, or those that will be coming on the show and watching the show, Mr. Glenn Derby. Glenn, thank you so much for being a part of the show, and just tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
Hey, thank you, Mark. I really appreciate you asking me to come on here, and any chance I get a chance to share my story in hopes to help others, I'm gladly to do it. So pretty much, long story short, we could talk for hours about the whole story, but I grew up with a father who was pretty rough. And I was instilled with messages from not only my father, but also from school, parents, coaches, etc., that there was a message that was instilled in my head that I was not good enough. And this not good enough carried up into my adulthood, even to the point of when I was playing in the NFL, I still didn't feel good enough. And so about 4 years ago, I have a counselor that I work with now who was able to untap where that message was coming from and how to get rid of it. So now I can live with a clear head, and I don't feel that way anymore at all. I've got a father above who unconditionally loves me no matter what. He doesn't hold over all those things that I did, which were really dumb.
Yes, sir.
And he's forgiven me, and he sent his son down here to forgive all of us, and I'm now taking advantage of it. And so, yeah, I love sharing my story.
Good deal, man. Good deal. And I know during our initial conversation, Glenn, you talked about going through alcohol abuse and drug abuse. You shared with me a story about how you got started with that. I think you were 13.
Yep, I was. Yep.
Talk about that.
So I was a very, very loving, kind kid when I was young. And the messages and the things that happened, because I was a foot taller than everybody else in my class. I had teachers that were expecting me to act, way older than I was.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, school wasn't going so well for me, and I wasn't liking going, and I started to become this really, really angry dude. And this anger was intense and massive. And I got a situation where a friend of mine and I decided we were going to have some beers together, and we challenged each other to drink a 6-pack. Each of us slammed 3 beers. And after about 1.5 beers, I had this feeling that came over me that was like, that's the first time I felt peace. And I equated it with God. I'm like, oh, this is what they're talking about when they talk about that peace with God. And I'm like, oh, this feels so good. And so from then on until I was 29 years old, all I was doing was chasing that high again because it felt so good. And I believe at that moment, if not was a full blown, I was definitely well on my way to becoming an alcoholic. And I sure as hell took advantage of it, and I did it. I became quite the alcoholic and drug addict.
Wow. So were you even drinking heavily and doing all kinds of other things during your NFL years?
People think this is absolutely crazy, but I literally was partying hard at least every weekend. And after the games, or at least every Wednesday or Thursday night, not always, Wednesday and Thursday, but at least one night a week. Every time after the games, this was starting in high school, and I would party my ass off. There were times in the off season when I'd be out in the taverns until 2 or 3 in the morning, go to after parties, and then get to the stadium at 6 a.m. for our leg day, doing our heavy squats, and I'd be squatting 700 pounds.
What?
And then going over and puking, and then coming back and doing it again.
Oh.
It was a mentality thing that I know guys that play at that level. You probably know it in the military. I mean, we can tell our minds to do things that normal people, they look at you and go, "You're nuts."
You're nuts. Yep.
I was able to, because of that anger, I believe it was the anger. I believe it was the, trying to prove to everybody that I was worth something. I
Mm-hmm.
would do a lot of stupid stuff.
Mm, mm.
So and I look back on it and I wonder, could I have been a lot better of an athlete and could I have played a lot longer if I wasn't partying the way I did? And I think I would. I think I would have been a lot better and I probably would have played for a lot longer. But
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
wasn't my journey. And I think, God, I say this to everyone, it's only through the grace of God and he's what's kept me alive. He's what's kept me going all these years. He's the reason why I don't drink or use anymore.
Mhm.
He's the reason why now I feel I can share my story because the story is true. I don't have the lies anymore in my head,
Mm.
and that makes it really free and really easy to do that.
Yeah. You mentioned in our conversation that you abandoned God at 19.
I did.
What
My
what
dad,
it, go
yeah,
ahead.
my dad was an Episcopal priest. Um,
Oh, that's
Growing
ironic.
up. Yeah. And so I went to the Episcopal church starting not, I mean, probably right around the same age that I started drinking. Um, and so I would go to church. He was going to church. And then he decided right before my freshman year in high school that he wanted to become a priest. He was a school teacher before that. And so he moved all of us out to Wisconsin to go to a seminary. And so I'm going to church and these churches I'm going to, I'm doing like the acolyte thing. And after church was over, the
Mm.
priest would give us the wine to drink
Oh,
because you're supposed to drink it all afterwards. So I'm in church drinking and I'm not legal, obviously. And I saw a couple things happen. One was I remember listening to my father give a sermon about loving your family no matter what, that the man is to love the woman, to love his family, and yada yada yada. Come home from church at noon, and my mom and him got in a huge fight, and he
mm,
was so disrespectful. And I
mm.
remember looking at him going, "What the hell? I mean, you just got done telling all the people in your church this message, and you come home and do this."
Yeah.
And I started to see here hypocrisy, and there
Uh,
was a couple other things that happened that I was like, at 19 years old, I left the church. I said, I'll never come back. I knew there was a God. I didn't believe he gave a shit about me. And
mhm.
I didn't go back to church until I was in my 40s. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So um, from 19 until about 45, only church I went into was for a wedding or a funeral.
Mm. 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 I know you mentioned we talked about this, but I want to ask, how did your life experiences shape your views of being a man and being in relationships, Glenn?
So I believe one of the struggles we have in our society in this country is we don't really have a ceremony that takes somebody from being a boy to being a man.
Sure.
It's just kind of assumed. And so I believe there's a lot of men in our society that have not given up that juvenile, immature boy behaviors as men. And when I've started reading the Bible and I started really following Jesus and listening to what he said and how he said it, all the things that he was talking about was responsibility, acceptance. You're 100% responsible for your behavior. There's no blame on anyone else. Yes, circumstances can happen,
Hmm.
but you take responsibility for all of them. And that, in my opinion, is what a man is. A
Hmm.
man is someone that's going to stand up, take responsibility.
Hmm.
If he's wrong, admit it,
Hmm.
and then make amends if there's amends needed. Those are all the things that I've learned from reading the Bible and following Jesus.
So you've made amends with God, is basically what you're saying.
Yeah. I I remember sitting in the counselor's office and he looked at me and he said, this is Dr. Rick Marks, who is just spectacular. He said to me, he goes, Glenn, your father's only job was to get you to be an adult. Did he do it? And I said, yes. He goes, so why are you still using your father all these years later, trying to have him be your role model? And I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, you're still hearing voices that he's telling you that you're not good enough. And he's no longer your father. He did his job. He got you to be an adult. So who is your father? And he kept saying that. I'm like, going, I couldn't take it. And all of a sudden I'm like, oh, you're talking about God. And he goes, God loves you unconditionally. He absolutely does not look bad on you, down on you, anything for what you've done in the past. He is just so grateful and glad that you're here today, that you are learning your lessons, you're learning your things, and he knows and he loves you, and he knows you're going to make more mistakes, but he still loves you. So I went from having my earthly father, and I forgave him, and he did the best he could. I love my dad, my earthly dad. I love him, but he's not in my head anymore. My earthly dad is not in my head anymore. And he's passed on, so it makes it a little easier, but I don't take anything from him anymore. All my father is up here, and that's who I go with.
Amen to that, brother. Amen to that. You mentioned that, and we're going to talk about the trauma piece.
Yeah.
Because this question plays into it. Were you ever abusive to your children or anybody? Did you follow your dad's footsteps and become abusive?
Well, when we first, my ex-wife and I, when we first got pregnant, obviously being an NFL football player and I was a high school football coach, everybody was saying, oh, I bet you're hoping for a boy. And I said, I kind of want a girl. And I wasn't just saying that. I really meant it. I really meant it. And I had this just feeling inside of me that, no, I want a girl. And we didn't find out the sex. And when she was born and I had hold of her and I looked at her and she was just the most beautiful thing in the world, I was like, oh my God, I love her so much. And then 2 years later, we had another one. And the same thing. I wanted a girl. I wanted 2 girls. And when my oldest, Savannah, I think she was 3 or 4, she did something that really irritated me. And I got really mad. I mean, I could feel this rage in me, like I was just pissed. And I reached down and I see her in those pretty eyes of hers. She looked up at me and I went, oh. I turned around and I walked away and I went outside, and I wasn't following Jesus at the time, but I went outside and I'm like, damn it. I'm like, what is wrong with me? And I was pissed and I was like, ah. And then all of a sudden I'm like going, maybe that's why I wanted a girl. Because if that would have been a boy, I probably would have done what my dad did. And I would have reached down there, grabbed him, thrown him up against the wall and said, God, and I would have been like just all rage on him. So I think God knew what he was doing. I mean, I know he knew what he was doing. He gave me these 2 beautiful girls. I have not been abusive to my daughters the way my dad was. I did have a period of time before I learned about the trauma where I got over angry at them. And I, since apologized, and they understand where I was coming from. I'm sure they're going to go to counseling for trauma from their dad, but it was not the abusive anger. It was the over anger of it. And, when in the Bible, it tells us to be the person for those kids, that is our job as a role model, to take that seriously. And, so I did, and I have worked really, really hard. And I think both my daughters would say that I have not lost my anger or my emotions since I learned about the trauma. So I think they know what the reason was. I think they accept it, and I think they're okay with it.
Yeah. I think it's important for people to understand, though, Glenn, that we're human. We're flawed. And in saying that, we are flawed emotionally. We're not going to walk the perfect walk. People expect you to be on your P's and Q's all the time, and we're not. we're going to have a moment where we might crack a little bit. We're going to have a moment where we may say or do something that is contrary to what God wants us to do. And it goes back to what you were saying earlier about, hey, God understands. He knows we're not perfect, but as long as we can acknowledge what we're doing and not get caught up in the mess, that's the beauty of being human, because we have the capacity to catch ourselves. You understand?
I
We
do.
we don't get lost in the moment. We know, like you caught yourself. And that's what a lot of people have to understand. We have to give ourselves grace to know that every day is not going to be peaches and cream, brother. There's going to be moments where you might, go to the left or to the right a little bit. I mean, hey, it happens.
It
But
does.
as long as you catch yourself, recognize what you're doing, and get back on, as James Brown said, get back on the good foot, you'll be all, we'll be all right.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And I probably, one of the things that I have struggled with here in the recent future is, our polarization right now in our country of, people claiming that they are following Jesus or calling themselves Christian, and they're so into this perfect, you got to be like, follow these rules and they're not accepting of the fact that they are human and they are going to make mistakes. And he does forgive us for everything. I mean, it's not like he picks and chooses what he's going to forgive us for.
Yeah.
And all of the, I like to, this is how I think, and I could be wrong, but I've checked it out and I believe it. Every single person on earth is one of God's children.
Yeah.
They may not be children of God because they're not following him, but they're
Mm,
still his children. And
mm,
because they're still his children, we
mm,
need to love them, regardless of what their situation is. The 1 in 99, that one sheep that we go after, the
mhm,
one who is lost, that's what he wants more than anything else in this world, is for us to be like him. And he went after the one. He went with the prostitute at the well. He went with the tax collectors. He
mhm,
went with the lepers. He went with the people that were ostracized by the crowds.
mhm.
And he said, these are the people that you need to go after, and you need to love them the way I love them. And
Indeed.
I just think that is missed in a lot of people that are going around saying they're Christians and, judging everybody and saying you can't do this and you can't do that. And,
Mm, mm, mhm,
it hurts my heart because I feel bad for the people that they're talking about.
mm,
I don't agree with, like, I don't agree with a lot of what these people are doing, but I don't think that it's our job to judge them and make them feel bad and kick them out of the country, or, whatever people are doing. I don't think that's what he wants us to do. And
mm.
it hurts my heart when I hear people talking bad about people like that.
Indeed. Indeed. Everybody deserves a shot. Everybody
Yes,
deserves at greatness and glory. So, and we're all
yes,
deserving of it. So I agree with you too, brother.
yeah.
Uh, Staying on that track of abuse and trauma, you talked about what you mentioned to me in our initial conversation about having a trauma problem. Do you remember that?
I do. It's
That you
a
had a
pivotal, it's a
trauma
pivotal part. It's a pivotal part to my story. So,
Yeah, so chop it up
and
about that.
I messaged the people I'm with, so we've got time, so we don't have to rush.
Okay,
Uh,
cool, cool.
I, I was sitting in my counselor's office after 6 months, because in my third marriage, I was blowing up. I was getting really, really angry, squealing my tires, punching a wall. I threw something through a window. My anger and my frustration was at a very, very high level. My ex-wife was claiming that I have CTE and I've got something wrong with my brain. And so she gets on me to say, you need to go get help. And I got to the point where I'm like, you know what? All right, I'm going to go find a counselor and I'm going to work with this counselor, because I've been to anger management 5,000 times in my life, because I've been angry since I'm like 11 or 10 or 11 years old.
Mm, mm,
And I would practice all the principles they would talk about. None of them worked. Um, and so I'm sitting here, and after about 6 months, this counselor looks at me and goes, Glenn, you don't have an anger problem. He goes, as a matter of fact, your anger is spot on. Everything that you're getting angry at, you should be angry. And then I'm like, well, then why am I losing my shit? And why am I like, ah? He goes, you don't have an anger problem. You got a trauma problem. And I'm like, what? I'm like, what do you mean? He goes, when somebody gets triggered from trauma, they lose control of their emotions. So he said, all of your ex-wives, I got 3 of them, they all 3 were very similar to my father in how they dealt with me. And it was not their fault at all. They, I don't blame them. Actually, I'm grateful because of them, I'm able to get to the point where I'm at now, which I really like. And they were reminding me of what I was trying to get when I was a child. And all I would hear is the abuse coming from my dad. And it would cause me to go into this like blind kind of like rage. And I'm a big dude and I scared the hell out of them. And I don't blame them. I know I was scary, but I kept saying to them, I don't feel like I'm going to hurt you. I don't feel like I'm frustrated. I can't get my message out. I can't tell you what I'm feeling and all of that. So when he said that, it just made so much difference in my life. Because now I've got techniques that I do. As soon as I start feeling any kind of agitation, I've got techniques that I do, and I realize really quickly, all right, this is not anger. This is trauma. So I don't have to react, and I don't have to justify or get defensive or any of those things because I know it's coming from my past and it's not true. It's not true. Those messages in your head are not true. They come from Satan and they're sent to you to try to get you off track, to try to get you undisciplined, to try to get you so mad that you're going to go drink, or so mad that you're going to go take a drug, or they're so mad that you're going to go cheat on your wife or whatever. That's Satan putting those messages in your head and saying to you, go do this. And if you can just realize God doesn't want that for you. He wants you to be calm. He wants you to be a wise person saying, okay, I'm not happy about this. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about what we can work through and let's be reasonable together.
And sober-minded.
Yes. Yes, absolutely.
Got to be basically in your right mind.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I know from my experience, Glenn, growing up, I was always a hothead, but once I realized that I was a hothead, I had to learn, I had to learn to stay away from people that triggered me.
That's one thing. Yep. That's what, I had to do that too. But what's beautiful now, and this is the thing about what I've learned is you don't have to be away from those people anymore. You can be around them and not get triggered because once you realize they're triggering you, now maybe you're able to help them and show them more of, like, here, let me help you follow. Let me help you. My leader is so cool. He'll let you come along and he'll let you learn the same things that I've been learning. And, you can bring people on that you used to get triggered by. It's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. I mean, now we talk about triggers and PTSD basically, but what is complex PTSD? Because I know you mentioned that you deal with complex PTSD. What is that?
So this is the way I was explained, and it makes total sense. A bunch of counselors were working with clients, and they all were presenting symptoms and behaviors that were very similar to PTSD. Yet they did not have that major thing or things that caused, like, the Vietnam vets were probably the first ones that were really like publicly recognized as having this thing called PTSD.
Sure.
Women who are raped or men that are raped or people that are taken advantage of whether they're young or old or whatever, those are major, major things that happen in their life that causes them to have PTSD because something like I like to give the example when I was running a school, I had a teacher who had PTSD. And I said, how good are you at handling? He goes, oh, I think I could do okay. I'm like, okay. Well, what happened was in his classroom, one of the students took a book and slammed it on the desk because he was mad. Well, this teacher dropped to his knees and went underneath the desk. Well, all the kids are like, ooh, what happened? What was that? And then he gets up and he explains to them that he has PTSD and loud noises do that. I'm like, oh boy. So now all my kids, because I worked with troubled kids, they all started slamming their books and he'd drop and go under. So I finally said to him, I said, I don't think you can work here because they're not going to stop. I mean,
No.
they're just kids and that's what they do. And it's
Wow.
dead wrong. So
Wow.
anyways,
That's
I thought that's what PTSD was. And when he said you have what's called complex PTSD and then explained it to me, what happens is when you're growing up as a child, you have so many things that you're looking at and you're learning from. And of course, your caregivers, whether they're your parents, your grandparents, your step parents, your adopted parents, whatever, those are your caregivers, and they give you messages in your brain. Okay, because you're craving it. You're this little kid and you're like, I need this, I need this. So you're listening to all this. Well, if you have someone who is not real well versed in dealing with kids and he's someone who gets angry very, very easily, and when he gets angry, he does physically hurt you, and you're going to school and you're getting made fun of at school, and then you get into a fight, and then all of a sudden a school teacher or principal paddles your ass, and you're always in trouble. And that message gets ingrained into one part of your brain.
okay.
So I like to give the example. If you're a 10-year-old, let's say, and you're sitting at the table and you spill milk and your dad comes and screams at you, damn it, we're going to be late. You got to get this thing cleaned up. When you get home, you're going to be grounded and da 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 da. And he goes on and on and on all the way to school. He's screaming at you. You get out of the car, you feel like a piece of crap. You go to school, you're regretting going home because your dad's going to get all over your ass again, and you just don't want to go. Well, that memory goes into one part of our brain and it stays there. Same scenario. Well, and then let me go, all right, 20 years from now, you spill milk or you spill coffee and your wife gives you a look and you go, ah, and you're like, I'll clean it up, and you like panic and you're like making a huge deal out of it. But it's not a big deal. She wasn't even mad. She just gave you a look that's like, what, you dumbass, what are you doing and whatever. So that memory is stuck in there, and that's why you acted that way. Same scenario. You spill the milk, your dad screams at you, you get in the car and your dad says, hey, I'm really sorry I yelled at you. I know it was a mistake and I probably got too angry at it, but you made a mistake, and we need to do a better job of making sure that we're ready to go so that we're on time, so we're not late for school and work. I love you very much. It's going to be fine. It was just a mistake. Now you get out of the car, you go to school, have a great day. You're going to come home, your dad's going to love you and all that. And that memory goes into another part of your brain. 20 years down the road, you spill milk and your wife gives you that look and you smile and you say, I'm really sorry I did that. Here, let me clean it up and I'll help you out. You didn't get triggered. And that's the difference. And that's where all those memories, when at this stage, I had to go through and I had to look at all of them, or as many as that would pop up. And I had to say, hey, that was a mistake. Your dad was yelling at you and instilling those kids at school. They didn't know any better they didn't know it was going to hurt you to make fun of you just because you were a foot taller than everyone. They didn't realize that, and they didn't mean it, but that's how I took it. And that's where it went into the brain. So fast forward to adulthood. Now, all of a sudden I'm in these relationships where I'm like getting triggered left and right about stuff that happened when I was a kid.
So basically, you're dealing with trauma, unresolved trauma from your childhood that pretty much affected your adulthood, right?
It affected every one of my adult relationships. I'm
Yeah.
telling you, there were times where at my job where I was, a boss of, I oversaw about 25 people. I can look back on scenarios where I got so angry at some of my employees,
Mm,
I was triggered. I know
mm,
for a fact now, and some of them I've even gone back and apologized and said, man, I'm sorry I treated you the way I did. That was
mm.
wrong. And that's why I not only speak to like couples and children, schools and athletes and, colleges and that, but I also speak to corporations because if you got someone that's a leader, especially, but even people that are in the lines and they're getting triggered by their trauma, production's going to go down.
Sure.
People are not going to feel safe. People are going to think there's something wrong with you. People are going to not be able to come to you. They're not going to be able to perform at a high level because they're sitting on pins and needles going, when's he going to explode?
Mm.
And you can, I think, people can recognize it. And I think there's a lot of people out there that had childhoods and they don't realize how much that trauma's affected their adulthood.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just taking it all in because I believe you. I
Yeah.
believe you. Growing up in my high school years specifically, I remember uh friends that I had that were in very abusive and toxic environments, man. And I don't know how they turned out, but I do know that the environments that they were in were not good. And I'm pretty sure that at some point they probably started. There were I know there was one kid that I know, Glenn, started acting out because he got tired of the BS at home. He got tired of it and he started acting out. There was a
Well,
there
you,
was a
you know,
young
you,
girl.
you go to,
She ran to the military. She ran to the military when she couldn't
yeah,
afford to, bro.
you go to any school and you see the kid that's sitting there that's not talking, that's
Mm,
totally quiet because they're scared to death, or you see the kid that's acting out like the class clown that's being a total jerk. Any of those kids, you can probably go into and see that there's something going on at home that is not good. I would say more kids, well, maybe not more, but there's a lot of kids. And I will say this. I did a little bit of I'd love to do a bigger research on it, but I did a little research and I know a lot of people that are in recovery. And I went and asked as many as I kind of knew, and I said, do you think, and when I explained complex PTSD, I said, do you think that that might have had something to do with you becoming an alcoholic or an addict? And every one of them said, absolutely. That
absolutely.
was my answer. That was my solution. That was what I went to because I was feeling so crappy because of X, Y, or Z. And it was normally a boyfriend or a parent, a teacher, a coach, somebody put this message in their head that they were a piece of crap or that they weren't the right kind of person or whatever. And when they took that drink or that drug, it was that feeling that calmed it down so they didn't feel the pain and the craziness anymore.
Hmm.
And they think that, yes, that became their answer. And of course, when you keep on doing it, you end up getting addicted. And that's, I think almost 100% of alcoholic and drug addicts are running from some type of trauma.
When I first got out of the Marine Corps, I I was I started drinking heavier because
Right. Right.
I was
Yeah.
drinking I was drinking heavy then, but when I got out, I can laugh about this now. I was drinking heavier because when my PTSD symptoms started to kick in and manifest itself, I I didn't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So I used alcohol as a way to numb it.
Hmm.
And I used my reckless behavior because I couldn't shake it. And I just got tired. I got tired of trying. I was at a I, and I hit low. I went low. So I started doing reckless things. My view of life diminished social relationships. I mean, it tanked everything, just freaking tanked.
Well, and that's the other thing that I find with a lot of people that have this complex PTSD is they don't know how to fit in socially. And I'll give you a good example. There's a guy named Michael Chernow, Chernow. He's an influencer on TikTok and all those, and he's a phenomenal chef, and he's a really cool dude. And I heard him one time. He said in the morning he gets up and he smiles for over 20 seconds. So he just gets in, he just smiles. And he said that physiologically changes the brain. So think about this. He's telling you to smile. And I know I started doing it, and I had people coming up to me that never used to come up to me that said, they were scared of me because I'd walk around with that resting bitch face, not even knowing I was doing it, And so I changed and I started smiling all the time, and people started treating me different. Well, think about this. These people with this childhood trauma or this childhood Satan entering the brain, giving them wrong information, now they feel like they're no good and they can't belong into social circles. That's the trauma that's causing them to not get into those. So once you can calm that down and figure that out and get it so that that's not what's triggering you, now all of a sudden you start to belong and you start to realize those circles that I was hanging with, because I remember, when you're a new kid in school, the first kids that are going to be friendly to you are the troublemakers, not the popular jocks and not the popular, smart kids and those kids. They're the last to be friends with you because they don't trust you. They don't know. But these knuckleheads, they're the first. So every time I went to a new school, and I went to a lot of new schools, every time I went, who were my first friends? Troublemakers. So I became a troublemaker. And it was just naturally, that's what happened. So people that have trauma and people that feel really awkward in social situations, that's exactly what you said. You see friends and you see people that you were growing up with that you're like, they turned out to be drug addicts. They committed suicide.
Or attempted,
or they get into horrible relationships. They pick like horrible people to be with. And, it's sad. And it's not what I don't believe that's what God wants to happen. I think that's Satan. And that's what they talk about. The world is Satan's playground, and we're just in it temporarily to learn our lessons and move on to the next world, which is where the greatness is.
Indeed.
So I think that's why God kept me alive all these years, is to try and help people understand this concept and maybe have a better life and feel better about it.
Indeed, brother.
Yeah.
Indeed. Your triggers.
What's that?
What are your triggers?
My biggest triggers is somebody not thinking I'm good enough.
Like your dad.
Like my dad. And, so even today, like if I do something and I hear somebody maybe and I've gotten a lot better at it, but somebody like criticize me, my first reaction is defense. Nope, you're wrong. Or that's not true. And yet what they're saying is true. They're not lying. They're giving their reality of what they perceive that I did or didn't do. Like, I'll give a good example. I'm starting to do a lot of public speaking, and I had some speaking coaches, and they would say, I don't know. And I would literally feel like a piece of crap. They were being very, they were doing a good job of helping me to do it better. But I took it as criticism, and I took it as, oh, I'm not good enough. Maybe, and then I'll go to the whole point of, no, I'm not going to do public speaking. I'm not good enough at it. That's a lie, and that's where those triggers, the other triggers that I have would be, and I've gotten so much better at it with, if my daughters do something that I don't agree with in the past, that would trigger me to get loud. And, and now I don't get loud at them anymore. I just say, hey, maybe you might want to think about doing it this way. And if it's too much, I'll just say something like, I'm not going to do this for you if that's the way you're going to behave. and just really make it so matter of fact that it's not even a big, major deal. And it works so much better.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, uh just out of curiosity, what team did you play for in the NFL?
So I was drafted out of Wisconsin by the New Orleans Saints.
Mm.
And I played with them for 3 years. And then I was the first crew of NFL players to get free agency. So that would have been in 1991. Um, Prior to 1991, no player moved teams. And a lot of people these days don't realize that, with all the free agency, the way players move from team to team to team, that
Yep.
never happened. When you got drafted by, say, the Pittsburgh Steelers, you were a Pittsburgh Steelers until you were cut. And then once you were cut, then you could go to another team.
Right.
So the only guys that were switching teams were the guys that got cut. So
Mm.
I was in that first crew of when they decided to go ahead and start free agency. And then I went to Green Bay. I was playing, I went to Green Bay in April. So I was with Green Bay from April until about September. I ended up getting injured and I ended up walking away from the game.
Mhm.
There were a lot of reasons. And that a lot of them will be in my book, which my book's coming out soon. I'm hoping it'll be out by May 1st.
What's your book going to be called?
I don't have a title yet. I will let you know as soon as I know.
Yeah, yeah.
I've got a couple people that are working with me and we're trying to get it all put together. So I'm looking forward to that. And that'll, in the book, it'll talk a lot about some of the reasons why I did some of the things that I did. And, like I said, you and I could have a podcast for probably 24 hours on the crap that I went through, but yeah, so it's all good.
Awesome, man.
Yeah.
What would you say to the young Glenn, knowing what you've learned now, if you could turn back and see the younger you, what would you tell him?
That's a really good question. I think the biggest thing I would tell him is, listen, dude, don't believe the lies. Adults are not always right. They have their own issues and you are just fine. You're doing a really good job.
Mm-hmm.
I think our people, our kids, our youth need to know that they are good enough to do whatever they want. And, it really comes down to discipline. The people that are successful are a little more disciplined than the people that are not successful. A lot of our kids are running around confused because they don't have a structured home. They haven't been taught discipline. They haven't been taught how to behave appropriately. And there's a lot of kids that are being raised by kids. They're very, very confused. So I would say to me, Glenn, you're doing just fine. You're going to be okay.
Mm.
You don't have to prove anything because you're already okay. Because from about probably 12 or 13, I had to prove, in my mind, I had to prove to everybody that I was worthy.
Mm.
And that's hard to do as a kid.
Mm-hmm. It's a lot placed on you too as a kid.
It really is.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I say this to the viewers, you are worth it. If you're having a moment where your sense of self is broken or jaded a little bit, take a few steps back, look within yourself and say that you are worth it, because you are. At the end of the day, you have to answer to yourself, not the person next to you, not your boss, or not even your neighbors, whoever. You have to answer to yourself. So pick yourself up. It's okay to not be okay.
Yep.
But do something about it.
I love
Stay.
Yes, Mark, I love what you're saying, and I'm gonna tell you that was one of the best things that's happened to me in the last like 12 years since I started following Jesus, is that what I started to fully understand what the resurrection was about, the reason why God sent him down here, the reason why we needed to be forgiven of all of that. Because what happened was, before Jesus, everybody had to follow rules. They had to either not sin at all, which is impossible, or they would just go ahead and sin like crazy because screw it, who cares? Once he came down and he was able to give us and say, you're born in the image of God and you're absolutely perfect. So you start off this world, you're perfect. And now all Satan gets popped in there. If we have adults that can say to you, you're doing just fine, you're okay, you're a good person. Yes, you make mistakes. And you know what? Don't get angry at the mistakes. Parents scream and yell at their kids because they make mistakes.
Mhm.
I think sometimes, like I did, I had to spank my daughter a couple times because she did things after she was told it could
Mhm.
be harmful. And I'm
Oh, yeah,
like,
oh, yeah.
you got to stop that.
Yeah, yeah,
But I
yeah.
never once got mad at them when they made a mistake.
Mm.
And that's the beautiful change in me was my dad, man, if you made any kind of a mistake, I don't care what it was, oh, look out, hell was coming. I mean, it was like, and so you make, like, it would be like you're walking around on eggshells because you don't want to make a mistake because, oh my God, he's going to scream and yell at you, or he's going to
Yeah,
hit you, or you're going to be grounded, or this or that.
yeah.
Yeah, no,
Man.
that's, man, we're human and we're gonna make a lot of mistakes. And I'll tell you right now, you go to the Pope or whatever you want to call the highest human that's following, God, they make just as many mistakes as you do.
Hmm. Believe that.
Yeah,
You
if
won't
not
know.
more.
Well, right. You won't know it though, but yeah, believe that
No.
they are.
Yeah,
Uh,
right.
there's a question here in the chat for you, Glenn. Question is, does your trigger still come out sometimes, or do you feel them coming on and address them accordingly?
Well, I have not been in a real hardcore relationship with a woman yet. Um, I did see somebody for a while, and sometimes I could feel it coming up. I've got a technique, I call it the harmony touch, where basically I put on all my screens this beautiful picture from when I was a kid. And I like to think about, I close my eyes and I rub my right in between my thumb and my finger. And I close my eyes and I think of that picture, or before I did, I looked on the screen, I would look at it, and I'd calm myself down and say, is it trauma or is it anger? Is it trauma or is it anger? Okay, it's most
Mm.
likely trauma. If I'm feeling like this, it's most likely trauma. So then I would all of a sudden, I'd kind of be able to get out of this and say, all right, let's look at this realistically. No, I don't need to blow up at this. I don't need to get angry at this. And I can ask simple questions of the person about what's going on. I now do feel it. I didn't at first, but I can feel it coming. And I know there's something that's bothering me,
Mm.
that I can picture it. So, but it's taken I mean, I don't ever tell anybody that it's easy. It's hard work,
Yes, sir.
and it's daily work.
Mm.
It's daily discipline. It's daily going through the whole thing, looking at scenarios that used to really trigger you and you go crazy. And
Mm.
you go into the same type of scenario. Now look at how you handled it differently. And
Mm.
I like to say, man, give yourself some grace and give yourself some compliments for recognizing that this is what this situation is. Because
Amen.
we tend to get caught up in our daily lives and we forget about our emotions, our thoughts, our cares, and those are all important.
Yes, sir. Indeed.
Good question. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Tony, for that question. How can people contact you?
The best way right now is my email, which is Glenn, two N's, Derby, Derby, like Kentucky Derby,
Mhm.
at mac.com. Or I'm on TikTok, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. Just type my name in there, you'll find me. Um, I am very open right now. I'm not extremely busy where I'm not able to answer most messages. You know, if you put down that it was Mark Ross podcast, then I'll definitely answer it, because I do get a lot of scam stuff. But
Uh,
you know, if you put Mark's name down, man, I'll get a hold of you right away.
right.
You know, I really, really, really believe that once you figure out the trauma's triggering you and you can fix that, you're going to have a way better life.
Hmm. And you can sleep better.
I sleep great now. Yes. Yes. Oh, I love sleep.
Because I could tell you there was days that I didn't,
Oh, it was bad. I'd be
unless
up
I
till
was
3,
drunk.
4, 5 o'clock in the morning, like going over every scenario. Like, what did I do wrong? What did she do wrong? Why did I
Yes.
do this? You know, and now I'm like, oh, I haven't done anything to piss anybody off or, you know, make my life miserable. So I can go
Right.
to sleep with a
I was gonna
clear
say,
conscience.
today
Yeah.
was a good day. Yeah, today was a good
Yeah. Yeah.
day.
Absolutely.
Mr. Glenn Derby, it has been a pleasure and a privilege to take a moment of your time to speak with you and get to know you and get to know your story. And I wish nothing but the best. I hope that your story does continue to get put out there. And I hope that people that are listening to us talk really get to understand how real mental health is. I want
Yes.
people to understand how real it is that we need to give ourselves grace. We can't hold the past into the present. The past is already it already happened.
Mhm.
We have to let the past be the past and just learn from it, right?
Absolutely. Mark,
Because
I think you are spot on. I love what you do. It's you know, you got a good heart. You're being led by the right guy.
yes,
And I'm just so grateful that I was able to be on here, and anything I can do in the future, let me know. Um, I appreciate you and I appreciate all the listeners. Um, God is good
all the time.
all the time, baby.
It's good.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mark Ross. As this has been another episode of the Speak Your Truth with Mark Ross podcast. Remember, everyone, self-care is important. So please make your mental health and your physical health a priority. Do it every day and do it first.
Amen. Amen.
Amen, brother.
Have a
You have a
great
good.
time, guys. I'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir.
All
Take care.
righty.
All right.
You
Bye
too.
bye. Yep.
Bye.